Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and in today's video, we are going to be designing a board game concept from a randomly generated prompt in 5 minutes or less. So if you're new to these style of videos, I'm going to switch screens and we'll clear the tablet. And if you look in the top right of the screen, we have a cropping of this game idea generator from a website called letsmakeagame.net, and they have this really powerful tool that will give us a genre, rule, setting, and theme for us to design around. And so once we click the generate button, we'll set our phone to be on a 5-minute timer so that we don't go too long, and that the goal is to feel the pressure to at least get something onto the page. And so we'll generate a prompt, we'll work on it for 5 minutes, and then once the 5 minutes are up, we'll recap where we got to with this concept and quickly talk about the next steps that I would take to take this concept idea and get it to a point where it was able to be play tested. So without further ado, let's generate. So we got the genre is third-person shooter, the rule is side effects, the setting is high fantasy, and the theme is descent into madness. And so this feels fairly open. So to make it a little more directional, in today's live stream, we talked about Glenmore 2 Chronicles. And so the additional rule is that we have to include a mechanic that is influenced by Glenmore 2. So we need a mech influenced by Glenmore 2. And so that will give us a little more of a direction to head. And so now that we've got our prompt and our added reference points that we need to observe, we will start the 5 minutes and begin. So third-person shooter would be third person. So you can see your whole character. And so the descent into madness, high fantasy, side effects. And so I think we would start with the Rondel style of, on the outside of the board, you have a set number of spaces in the Rondel. And where do we go from here? So we have our Rondel, and then within the inside, there is potentially some sort of map that, for the sake of initial design, we'll start with an additional grid. And so we have our grid here. And then maybe there'll be more to this, but the core concept is you'll have your little character pawn, and so that will be black. We can change colors to have a blue player. Oop. Sorry about that. So maybe the blue player is here, and then we'll change colors one more time and have the red player here. So we have our 3-player game, and so we'll use the same concept as Glenmore, where it's an action selection for a Rondel style. So if we jump back into black, these would be all populated with action tiles. And we would be, so a tile would look something like, maybe there's a cost to it. There. We got the art of the action there. And then potentially an effect or something here. So there'd be a bunch of those style tiles populated. And there is potentially a player board that you have the character you're playing as, and this grid that can hold is like your action queue. So potentially it's a grid of, you can program up to 4 actions, and instead of a cost, you have to pay the cost in the form of a side effect. And so that would be how you pay for it. And so the side effects would be potentially something like health loss, shield loss. So you have your player stats up here, and which would be in the form of maybe 3 tracks that you're managing. And all right, I think we're getting somewhere with this. So let me pull everything on the screen and do a quick time check. Oh god. So we got 20 seconds, so I'm going to pause the timer so I don't scare myself. And we'll talk through what we got to and what our next steps would be. All right. So our challenge today was to come up with a third-person shooter that has side effects as its rule. It's a high fantasy setting and descent into madness. And so what we came up with is, because we were challenged to borrow from Glenmore 2 a mechanic, we took the Rondel board setup of how actions are selected. And so the how the game would work is, so you'd have this deck of tiles that is maybe similar to Glenmore 2. There's 2 parts. There's an A and a B section. And so the A section would just be shuffled up, and then the B section would be shuffled up and split into 2 groupings. And similar to, I don't know if I can grab it quickly, but in Glenmore, there is this end of world tile that triggers the end of the game, or the conclusion where it moves into the end of the game. That would be shuffled into the bottom half of the B deck. And so this would be the timer for the game. And so how this game works is you're balancing your 3 resources of health, shield, and madness. And on your turn, whoever is furthest back in the rondel will select a tile from here to add to their player board. And so in your player board, you have an action queue. And so after you select a tile, you'll perform this action queue from left to right. And that is like the main structure of how the core of the game is. Furthest in back in the rondel will select a new tile to add into their rondel. And then you'll perform your action queue on your player board from left to right. And what you're trying to do here is be in this map the last person to survive. And so these different tiles have a side effect that you would have to overcome when you add it into your player board. And so some of those might just be that you have 3 turns that the card isn't active, and that your shield is set to 1, and then afterward you get full shield. Side effects like that in order to track it, you potentially have numbers on the side of the tiles. of 1, 2, and 3. And so each tile has a side effect that you have to overcome to add it into your action cue sequence. And your goal is to be the last to survive in this map. And once the ending tile is populated, there will be no more drafting and adding of tiles into your action queue. The rest of the game will be spent going back and forth between players, taking turns until there is only one player with health remaining. And that's sort of where we got to with this idea. So in order to make it testable, the main thing we would have to focus on is creating this stack of tiles and figuring out what those actions are and those abilities. And then we could quickly make this board by just doing probably a 5x5 grid in the middle here, and then making the action cues there. So this game wouldn't be playable until we at least had maybe, I don't know, if we were going to test it at 2-player first to see if it was any fun. My gut's saying that maybe there should be at least 10 A actions and 10 B actions, and we'll just double it so that there'd be 40 tiles total. And so that is where I'd start. I wouldn't worry about player powers yet. Wouldn't worry about that. I would arbitrarily set the different tracks to be capped at maybe 6 points, and we wouldn't worry about adding in that Descent into Madness. Maybe that is just a tracker that as you select more powerful tiles, they're pushing your madness tracker up. And so if you ever hit this point where you exceed the level of madness, that is another way to lose. And so without rambling too much on this concept, we'll end with saying that we got a solid idea here. We'd have to come up with 10 different effect tiles for each of the A and B's, and then we would come up with a final combat tile as sort of when that's flipped. Once somebody crosses that one, there would be no more drafting of tiles, and I would probably port all of this into Tabletop Simulator and then see if anyone would be willing to test it out with me. So with that concludes today's brainstorming challenge. I'd love to hear in the comments below what you think of this concept. I think there is. So that concludes today's 5-minute brainstorming challenge. If you like this style of content, feel free to subscribe. These videos go live every Friday, and I'd love to engage with you in the comments below.